Where you
we're
holding?
holding on 78B2 at the Mishnah. Okay?
B1?
B1.
Everybody strap on.
B1.
78B1. Excuse me. Thank you, Charlie. 78B1, the Mishnah. Okay? And there is
Strap
quite
on.
a bit. You strap on because there's quite a bit of lumdus here at the beginning. And it's interesting. Again, you'll see it come out very clearly. The answer to the question that if Corona is going on, how are we all bringing the Karban Pesach? Okay? There's a very simple answer in here based upon it. Here we go. Now, our Mishnah is talking about a Karban Yochid, an individual Karban. The Karban Pesach is called a communal Karban. It's called a communal sacrifice. That's very fine and dandy when you're thinking about it writ large. But when you're looking at each individual, of course, in and of his own tumah or tahara, his own purity or contamination, it's obviously an individual situation. Having now said that, let's begin.
Could I ask you one question?
Yes, sure.
But it's really not just like a yachid, because if you don't all register as a group, it doesn't work.
Correct. On the other hand, a group could be a group of one.
Oh, okay.
Remember that. A group could be a group of one.
Okay,
Or
I didn't know
even this. Let's say you take your family. So it's a group of 10.
Right.
But 10 versus the rest of Israel is a yochid. It's considered.
I get it.
In other words, the word individual doesn't really mean 1. It can mean 10 versus a million. That's still, in the comparison of majority versus minority, I'm a yochid. Right. Says the Mishnah. Nitma basar. The basar, the meat gets tameh. Okay? The meat gets tameh. The chelev kayam. But it's kosher fats. That means the fats that are offered onto the altar. So remember, every regular Karban except for an oila is split. There's a portion that's there for you to eat, and then there's a portion that gets offered up on the mizbeach. That gets it, otherwise known, if you remember the language, shulchan gevoya, the table of the Most High. It's the food of heaven, as it were. If you want to be poetic about it. So, here we go. Nitma basa, the meat got tameh. V'chelev kayim, but the fats, that means the emurim, as it were, the stuff being offered on the altar are good. The din is, einoi zayrek es hadam, when it comes to a Karban Pesach, you do not throw the blood. Says Rashi, the first Rashi in the Mishnah. That means the first skinny line. Nitma basa v'chelev kayim, ein zayrek es hadam. Everybody please look at the Rashi. Afilu Rabbi Eliezer. Even according to Rabbi Eliezer that learns, Im yesh dam afilu ein basar. There is blood even if there is no meat. Here Rabbi Eliezer would tell you, no, you can't throw. Why? The Iker Pesach la'achilas adam ka'asi. Because the Iker of Pesach, the underlying yesod of Pesach, is not its shchita, but in fact, it's meant to be eaten. This, which means that Pesach is a bit different than every other Karban. Again, I'm stressing this. That means at the time of shchita, there has to be potential for it to be eaten. I want to stress this. And there needs to be potential. Remember that word, potential. There needs to be potential for it to be eaten at the time of the slaughter. Keep going now back to the Mishnah. Nitma hachelev, in this case, if the chelev, the stuff being offered on to the mizbeach, it becomes tameh. V'habasa kayam, but the meat is kayam. The meat that could be eaten by us is kayam. Zayrik es adam, you do throw the blood, and this, you throw the blood even according to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua normally says, Im ein basar ein dam. If there's no meat, there's no dam. Im ein dam ein basar. But since over here there is meat, i.e. there isn't the meat to go up on the Mizbeach, because the Chaylev is Tameh, but there is meat for me to eat, that's enough for me to throw the blood. But Umikdoshim ain't a came. All other kabbanis, it's not like this. Ela af al pi shenitma. Habasa, even if the meat does get tamei, v'hachelev kayam, but the holy fat, the fats that are going to go up on the mizbeach are okay. Zayrek es hadam, you throw the blood, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, even according to Rabbi Yeshua. He says, what he called ein dam, ein bosa, ein dam. Since over here I have, at very least, I have the meat of the Shulchan Gevoya. I have meat that can go to Hashem Yisbarach on top of the altar. So again, it's Shulchan Gevoya, the table of the Most High. As a word, it's heavenly food, for lack of a better word. That's enough to throw the dam. Everybody look at Rashi in the Mishnah. Umigdoshin einoi kain. Afil Rabbi Yeshua. Even according to Rabbi Yeshua, that holds im ein basar ein dam. Shafilu nitma basar. Even if the basar, the meat, gets tameh, but the chaylev kayam, the chaylev, the fats are okay. Zayrek gets habadam. You throw the dam. The hartate ikka, because you do have two. You have the dam and you have the meat that's shulchan gevaya, that goes on the table of the Most High. Matir v'shirayim sha'adam matir emurin lemizbeach, because the dam is matir, the fats and the meat and the stuff and the emurin that go on top of the mizbeach. From here we see an unbelievable yesod, everybody. And here's the lumdus. The Rambam, clearly Maimonides, in his Sefer HaMitzvahs LeRambam, when he adds up the 630 mitzvahs in the Rambam, by every other carbon, he puts the mitzvah of shchitas of the carbon, the slaughtering of the carbon, plus its eating, he counts it as one mitzvah. Mashe'en came by carbon Pesach, it's two different things. The shechita, the slaughtering, is one. The eating of the mitzvah of the Pesach is a completely separate mitzvah. So Pesach has two mitzvahs. Every other carbon has one mitzvah. The slaughtering and the fact that the carbon needs to be eaten up is one mitzvah. The Rambam says Pesach is two mitzvahs. Shechita is a mitzvah by itself, and eating it is a mitzvah by itself. Comes the Beis HaLevi. The Beis HaLevi was the great-grandfather of the Rav. For all those who learned by the Rav, Charlie, that's the Beis HaLevi. The Rav was named Yosef Ber after the Beis HaLevi, after his grandfather. And the holy Chassam Sofer said the same thing. And the pshat is like this. With regard to every other carbon, I, the person, the Gavra, have no mitzvah to eat the carbon. The mitzvah that is not that I need to eat the carbon, but that the carbon needs to be eaten up. It's a din, it's a law in the carbon. The animal needs to be eaten up, but I personally don't have to be the one to eat it up. Which means that after we slaughter it, we can take 1,000,000 kahanim, or 1,000,000 people, give each people a tiny, tiny bit, less than an olive's volume, less than a kazayis, which we all know, a shir achila, the volume that is called eating min haTorah is what? A kazayis. Here, everybody gets less than a kazayis. But if 1,000,000 people come like a bunch of locusts, and they eat up the carbon, we will mekayim the mitzvah of slaughtering, and that the carbon will be eaten up. So the mitzvah by all other kabbanis is not a din in the gavra, it's a din in the chefza de carbon. It's not a din in me, the human being. It's a din in the animal. It needs to be eaten up. Therefore, you can begin to understand. By Mukdashin, it says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I can't eat it. That I can't eat it because the meat is tameh. It doesn't matter. I don't have a mitzvah to eat it. I don't have a mitzvah to eat it. As long as I can get it up onto the I have something that can go up on the altar, it's good enough. Mashen can carbon Pesach. No. There's a din that in the afternoon of the Erev Pesach you have to slaughter the Pesach. There's a separate mitzvah entirely that at the night of Pesach, at the Seder, you have to eat the carbon Pesach. Sli eish al matzah sumeroirim yoichlu. There's a mitzvah to eat it. Whose mitzvah? My mitzvah. It's not a din in the animal. It's a din in the gavra. It's a din in me. I have a mitzvah to eat. If I have a mitzvah to eat, that means how much do I have to eat at the very least? I have to eat a kazayas. I have to eat an olive's volume of the thing because I have a mitzvah. My mitzvah is a mitzvah to eat. Eating minat Torah is never less than the shear of a kazayas. Therefore, if nitma basa b'chelev kayim ain't a zayrik es adam. Because now that there's no meat for me to eat, there's no meat for me to eat, and the whole purpose of the carbon Pesach is so that we should get to that second mitzvah of eating, and the only way I can eat is if the meat is not tameh. But if the meat is tameh, what's the din? I can't eat it. I can't eat it. I can't throw the dam. So therefore, however, I'm going to make another point. Go ahead, Daddy.
No, that's good.
There's one other point. That's why I stress the word potential. If on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, there's the potential to eat it, that means the meat is not tameh or whatever. It's everything is good. So the potential is there to eat it. That's good enough to allow me to go ahead and slaughter it. If by the time we get to the night, the meat then subsequently gets tameh, or the person becomes tameh subsequent to the shechita, okay, then you can't eat. But it doesn't affect the slaughtering of the Pesach. The Pesach is slaughtered based on the potential at this moment in time that you should be able to eat it at night. Who has to eat it at night? Me, the person. Me, the person. That is a fundamental difference between Pesach and the rest of every other carbon. And that's what this Mishnah is talking about. And yeah, go ahead.
So according to Rambam,
yeah, Charles, go ahead.
You'd only be getting the mitzvah of shechita, but not achila if it became tameh.
Correct. Which therefore, now take it a step further now, Charlie. Since it's based on potential, if at the end of the day I don't eat, it turns out that the actual eating is not ma'akev. The actual eating does not have a negative effect on the slaughtering of Pesach. The slaughter of the carbon Pesach is based on potential that I can eat. If at the end of the day I don't eat, I don't get the mitzvah of eating the carbon Pesach. I was mevatel a mitzvah saseh. The world's not going to come to an end. There's a famous story with Rashi. Rashi, one year, he had all his grandchildren with him and all that. After the Seder, one of the grandkids came running and said, Zaidi, we forgot to eat the afikomen. With everything going on, Rashi forgot to eat the afikomen. You know what Rashi's answer was? No, next year. That's the answer. You don't go crazy. Literally, it's a true story. Rashi said, no, next year. You can't freak out. That's it. The Torah is not meant to be freaked out over, right? It happens. Life happens to the best of us. Okay, as my grandfather said, Rashi was a malach, right? Rashi was an angel, right? What he accomplished in his short life, in 65 years, is remarkable. So, Here we go. So now this is what's buried in this Mishnah. Remember all the pieces that we just said, because within everything I just said is going to come our answer. How in the world are we going to handle the Korban Pesach this year? Should Mashiach come and we can still have social distancing? We can't all be on the mountain. So let's figure it out. Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav, says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav, Im Zorak, but if you go ahead, Im Zorak Kurtzu, if you throw the blood on the altar, even though you weren't supposed to, the offering is accepted b'di eved de facto, and you don't have to make a Pesach Sheni. In other words, you're not supposed nikma basa v'chaylev kayim ein zarik esadam. But if you do throw the dam, if you do throw the blood after the fact, it's okay, and you don't have to make Pesach Sheni on Yudal and Iyar. But there's a chiyuv to eat the Pesach. So since you can't eat the Pesach because the basar is tamei, how could you say that he was mekayim the mitzvah of Korban Pesach? And the Gemara, exactly the words I just told you. Achilo loy ma'akva. Actual eating is not ma'akiv. Actual eating is not essential to getting the mitzvah. 78b2. So pray the Gemara v'aksir, but the pasuk says ish lefi ochloi. Each person according to what he eats. So you see that you do have to eat. Says the Gemara. The whole pasuk it goes like this. So the pasuk says like this: le mitzvah. I'm sorry. The part of it, in other words, says the pasuk. It says the Gemara le mitzvah. This pasuk is telling us that there is a mitzvah to eat, not that there is a chiyuv. In other words, there is a mitzvah to eat the matzah, the Pesach, but the actual chiyuv, in the sense that it will negatively, adversely affect our slaughtering of the Korban Pesach, that it does not do. So says the Gemara, la'akim loy, are you telling me that it does not? It's not essential. But Tanya, we learned b'michsas. The actual pasuk is u'michsas nefoshes ish lefi ochloi tochoigu alaseh. By the number of people, according to the number of people, each person in what he can eat, we go ahead and put him on. We slaughter the sheep for the Korban Pesach. What does this teach us? Something which, this is Charlie. This is what you were talking about before, about people registering on the Korban, Malamed, She'ein HaPesach Nishchat Elamenu Yov, that the Pesach is not slaughtered only for those who are registered on it. Yakul Shachta Shaloi Minoyov, I might have thought I'm allowed to slaughter it, even if nobody is registered. For those who are not registered on it, in other words, I've got a bunch of people registered on it, but I also have in mind those who are not registered on it. Or you don't have anybody registered on it, and it will be merely considered like, all right, I didn't do the mitzvah saseh. There was a mitzvah saseh. There was a mitzvah saseh, a positive commandment to have people registered on the Korban, right? To register on the, okay, I blew it. That I didn't do. But it's still a kosher Korban. It's still a Korban Pesach. Talmud Laima, therefore the pasuk says, ish lefi ochloi techaygu. It keeps going. It goes michsatz nefashos ish lefi ochlu. Right? According to each person, according to what he shall eat, you count. HaKosav Shaina Alav La'akiv. The pasuk itself, the requirement of registering on it to make you know that it's essential. The ikish and the pasuk is clearly comparing eating to counting, because the pasuk says you shall count ish lefi ochloi, every person to what he eats, which means that those who are counted on it are compared to those who are eat are compared to those who are counted on it. Just like counting, registering is ma'akiv, is essential. So too, being able to eat is essential. Elo Rab, so the Gemara says, you're right, we got to change up here. Elo Rab, the Amma ki Rab Nosson. Rab is coming to say like Rab Nosson. This, the Rab says, that the Pesach, if you throw the blood, You throw the blood, bidi eved, de facto, even though the basar is tamei, even though the basar cannot be eaten because it's tamei, if you throw the blood, de facto, bidi eved, it's okay, and you don't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. He's going according to Rabbi Nosson. The Omar achilas psochim loy ma'akva. The eating of the Pesach is not essential to the acceptance of the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. Hi, Rabbi Nosson. Which Rabbi Nosson are we talking about? If we're talking about this Rabbi Nosson, the Tanya, because we learned in the Baraisa, this Gemara is also brought in Mesechtes Kedushin Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. Mem Aleph Amud Beis and Mem Beis Amud Aleph. Rabbi Nosson Oimer. Rabbi Nosson says, Minayin Shekol Yisrael Yotzim BePesach Echad. Now you're getting our answer to our problem with regard to how we're going to bring millions of kabbanas. How are we going to bring 1 million Korban Pesachs when we have Corona? The answer is, Minayin Shekol Yisrael Yotzim BePesach Echad. How do I know Minat Torah that the entire nation of Klal Yisrael could be Yotzi with one Korban Pesach? Yeah, it is. One Korban Pesach. Because the Pasuk says, Talmud Loime B'shachtu Oisai Kol Kahal Adas Yisrael Benu Abayim. We have to translate this carefully. B'shachtu, and you should slaughter Oisai, it, individually, it, which means Yachid, one, Kol, all Kahal Adas Yisrael. So all Kahal Adas Yisrael, the whole nation will slaughter it, one. So, Frank the Gemara, are all the whole nation are going to slaughter this one poor animal? How many shchachtim do we have? Only one person does the shchita. There's only one slaughterer. Ela melamed shekol Yisrael yotzim b'Pesach echad. That all the entire nation of Israel it fulfills its obligation to slaughter the Korban Pesach with one animal. 78b3. Now, everybody, let's stop right here and think about this. That means, if that's the case, everybody, does that mean everybody can get a kazayas? Absolutely not. There's no way to get to a volume of an olive. So, and Pesach, you have to have, what do you call it? Right? So, from here, we're saying, number one, it sure looks like, according to Nosson, that eating is out of the question. The slaughter is the slaughter. It's one mitzvah by itself. The eating is another mitzvah all by itself. So therefore, you can slaughter one animal for all Klal Yisrael, and nobody will be mekayim the mitzvah of eating. But remember what I said before. That's all fine and good. But if that's the case, then there is no potential for eating. If everybody's on it, that means nobody's going to get a kazayas. Nobody's going to get an olive's worth. If nobody gets an olive's worth, what's the difference? You still can't slaughter it. There's no potential for the eating. Says the Gemara right over here. Dilma Shani Hossam. You can't just simply say that Rav Nosson saying eating has no effect on the slaughtering because you need potential. Shila Dilma Shani Hossam. Because if some people withdraw, people are allowed to withdraw from the carbon. So yes, since some people can withdraw from the carbon, and if these people withdraw, then these people will have enough to eat a kazayas. And if these people withdraw, can eat a kazayas. What's really going on over here? This is what we're saying here. At the moment of the slaughter, everything was great. The meat, the carbon was tahar. The meat was perfectly capable of being eaten. Every individual was tahar, let's say. So me as an individual, as a person in myself, I was perfectly capable of eating from this carbon. And my father was perfectly capable of eating with this carbon. And Jerry was able to eat from this carbon. And Charlie was able to eat from this carbon. And Jeff was able to eat from this carbon. And Isaac was able to eat from this carbon. Right? Each one of us individually. The problem only here was collectively there's too many of us. Says the Gemara, you don't have to look at it that way. Since the potential is there that anybody can fall off, could deregister, you're perfectly entitled to deregister from the carbon, right? You got freedom to deregister. That means each one of us at the moment of the slaughter was perfectly capable of getting this good meat and getting a volume's worth of the meat. At the moment of the shechita, the meat was good, and each one of us was good and had the capacity to get a what do you call it, on an individual basis. On the earliest, on the general station, we couldn't get it. But who said that's going to be a problem?
Each one has.
Everyone has the potential. That's it. Exactly, my father just said it.
Though.
That's all correct. But as long as it at the moment of the shechita,
as long as you
his
have the
potential
to be able to eat it, if some people have dropped out, then the shechita is good.
Right. The fact remains, which means that we can rely on this for Corona. That's what we're going to do. We're going to have one carbon brought as the carbon Pesach for all of Klal Yisrael, for all the Jews. It's going to be a kosher animal. We're going to make sure it's pure. We're all going to be pure. And guess what? We're all going to have the potential to eat it. All right? What happens at night? It happens. But on the 14th in the afternoon, there's your potential. Because again, it's based on that there's a difference between regular kabbanis, where the rule about eating up the carbon is a din in the carbon, mashayk and carbon pesach, each piece is separate. The shechita is one thing, the rule of eating is totally in me. So as long as I had the potential to eat at the time of the shechita, that's the difference. So of course, having just said, so therefore we can't bring proof from Rav Nosson over here, right? That there's no proof from Rav Nosson that eating isn't ma'akif. He's saying maybe eating is ma'akif. It's ma'akif in the sense that at the time of the shechita, you need potential to be able to eat. You need the potential. That's it. What happens later is a different story. But right at the moment of the shechita, you need potential for it to eat. So says the Gemara, Elohad Rav Nosson, 78b3. I told you guys this is fascinating stuff. Elohad Rabbi Nosson. Rather, it's a different Rav Nosson. The Tanya we learned. Now remember, by the way, we just finished saying that we explained Rav Nosson that people could deregister, and that's how we got around it. Now we have a little different Rav Nosson. The Tanya Nimnu olav chabura achas. If one group registered upon the offering, and this group was a big group, so in other words, the entire BJC, the entire Boca Jewish Sharet Tefillah registers on one carbon, so that there's only enough, exactly enough of a volume of meat, of a shia kezayis of meat for every member. So that's it. Everybody, every member of this first group, of the BJC group, okay, has enough to get a kezayis of meat. And then, because you go back and we decided to be nice, v'nimnu alav chabura achas, and then we take another group. We registered the entire BRS. Now, secondly, we put on all BRS members. The problem is, the BRS members, there's not enough meat for them, because we used up all the kezayis of meat on the BJC people. Rishonim, the BJC people, yesh lahem kezayis, to have a kezayis, they have an olives volume. Oichlin, they eat to Pesach Sheni. They eat their portions, and of course they're parted from bringing a second Pesach because they were just mekayim their mitzvah. They fulfilled their mitzvah of Pesach Rishon, the first Rishon. Achroinim shein lehem kezayis, but BRS that does not have the kezayis, ein oichlin v'chayovim lasis Pesach Sheni. Do not eat any meat, because since at the time of the slaughter, it was already known that they do not have enough meat for them. All the other people in BJC already reserved their kezayis, which used up all the meat. So the BJC guys therefore do not eat the meat, any leftover meat, which is less than a kezayis. And of course, lasa is Pesach Sheni. They need to do a Pesach Sheni. Rav Nosson but Rav Nosson comes and says no. Elu ve'elu poitrim in lasis Pesach Sheni. Side the first group of BJC that are eating a kazayis. Side the people from BRS that are not eating a kazayis. What do you call it? It's good, and they don't have to bring a Pesach Sheni. They've been kaim the mitzvah with the Pesach Rishon. Why? Shekevan nizrak adam. Because the blood has already been thrown for those who are registered on it. Says Rav Nosson over here, the dam has been thrown. At the time when the dam was thrown, everybody, what's the story here? The BRS people have no chance, have no potential to eat a kazayis. And he still says it's good, that they don't have to bring a Pesach Sheni. From here is a raya that he holds, that it's completely not ma'akiv, that it's completely mutually exclusive. You can slaughter the Pesach Rishon even if you can't eat it, and there's no potential, and the eating is a separate story, b'chlal. So of course the Gemara jumps all on top of it. It says absolutely not. Akati dimul shani hasam. I'll give you the same problem. The e mishri hani havi. Because if the first people were to withdraw, the BJC people will withdraw. The BRS people now have enough for a kazayis. So again, you look at each shul individually, right? At the time of the shechita, BJC, they had their possibility, and BRS had the potential to eat. If BJC drops out, right? If that's it. Says the Gemara, in Cain, if that's true, if that's the theory that, that one group can drop out so that the other one has the potential to come in and eat, listening, then you should have said regarding the second Pesach that they're all, when instead of saying Elu ve'elu poitrin milasis Pesach Sheni, you should have said Hoyel v'royin l'mi Moshe. The reason why you don't have a second Pesach is not because you threw the blood, but it's because the first ones are fit to withdraw. The first one, BJC, could withdraw, so BRS could be in. My shekva nizrak adam. So, but now what we're saying, you should have said because of the potential. That's not what you said. You said shekva nizrak adam because you threw the blood. It's not totally in potential. It's not totally dead. It's totally in. If I throw the blood, de facto, b'di'evet, it's good to go. Shema mina. From here we learn. Badam talya mitzvah, that the thing is tied to dam, aval achilo loy ma'akva, but eating is not essential. That once the dam of the Pesach is thrown, once somebody is registered on it, he has fulfilled his obligation to bring the carbon Pesach, even if there's no possibility that he will partake in meat. And if you want to see it, the article actually uses those words. If you look on the bottom, follow that right-hand column, just the first line, right on column on the bottom by the notes. There was no possibility that he could partake of its meat. There is no participation in meat. Number 24, there's no possibility he could take it as meat because that's the chiddush of Rav Nosson.
So wait a second.
Okay.
Does that mean
now we understand? Yeah.
Does that mean that Rav Nosson
go
will
ahead.
allow somebody who's uncircumcised to get the mitzvah of chastity?
No. Good, great question. The answer is no, because, and that is why the pasuk goes out of it says to say, "V'chol oral loy oichel." Any uncircumcised person cannot eat. Exactly. The pasuk actually goes out of its way, and now you know why it goes out of its way, because otherwise there are ways to go ahead and say that they could do it, especially somebody who's an oral b'shoigeg, somebody who's uncircumcised inadvertently because unfortunately his two older brothers passed away from the circumcision. So you don't circumcise the third brother. So really he's an oinus. And the halacha always is oinus rachmana patre. The Torah patters completely wipes away an oinus. But if that's the case, you should bring a carbon Pesach, so the Torah goes out of its way. Exactly. Charlie, good point there. So says the Gemara, my duchke de Rab, the moikim le'masnisim lechatchila. The Rab Nosson, what compelled Rab to interpret our Mishnah that it's tied? because Nizrak Adam, that the blood was thrown. Let him learn up the Mishnah, like the opinion of the Rabbanon, and say that even after the fact it is not accepted, because in fact it is. What is forcing him to do this? Rab Masnis and Kasher, because Rab had a problem with the words of the Mishnah. Why did our Mishnah not say? Amai Tani, why does our Mishnah say that if the meat gets tomei, ein zoyrek es adam? If you remember, our Mishnah says nit ma bosa. If the bosa comes tomei, the chaylev kayim, and the holy fats are kayim, ein zoyrek es adam. Why does it say ein zoyrek es adam? Listening posel. It should say not that you do not throw ein zoyrek es adam. It should have said nit ma bosa v'chaylev kayim posel. It's posel. It's no good. It's invalid. By leaving this open over here, Ela Shma Mina, Ein Zoyrek L'Chatchila, you don't throw the blood initially, but after the fact, it's okay. Since the Rabbanon, of course, hold that eating is essential, that Achila is ma'akiv, in order to bring, you have to have the potential to eat at the very least. Therefore, the Mishnah must be Rab Nosson. Says the Gemara, Rab Nosson, and according to Rab Nosson, what is he going to do with the words? Ish lefi achloi lamali. If he says eating is not ma'akif, then what are you going to do with the words? Each person according to what he eats. Now we come all the way around. It touches that each person which brings the Pesach offering needs to be fit to eat from its meat. Notice what he says, everybody. To be eaten, gavra. That it's not tied to the meat. It's tied to the person. The person has to have the potential to eat from its meat. Even if the meat has no potentiality that he'll be able to eat from it. It's totally in the gavra and not in the chepso. You hear? It's totally in the person. The person needs to be right at the time of shchita to be able to eat from the meat, even if the facts remain that the meat is unedible. Fascinating. This, by the way, is where, of course, this is known as the brisker derech halimud. In brisk, which is to say the Soloveitchik way of learning, is that the entire world is split between Gavra and Chepsa. Do you look at the person, essentially us, or do you look at the item at the Chepsa? And its differences in halacha, etc., throughout Shas and throughout the Torah. And this is where you're seeing it playing out very, very, very clearly. The difference between Gavra and Chepsa. Says the Gemara, Man Tana Lahad the Tana Rabbanan. So who is the Tana of which the Rabbanan learned in the following varieties? We're going to bring 3 different varieties here, trying to figure out who the Tana is. 78b4. So it says like this: Sheshachtu la'ichlav. If one slaughtered the Pesach for those who are able to eat it, v'zarku dama shaloi la'ichlav. But then threw the blood upon the altar for those who are unable to eat from it. Ha-Pesach atzmai kasha. The Pesach itself is good. Va'adam yoytze ba yedei chavasai. And the person discharges his obligation. He doesn't have to bring a Pesach sheni. Keman nema Rav Nosson v'hi v'loi Rabbanan. It seems pretty clear. It's like Rav Nosson and not the Rabbanan. Because clearly, you can't eat it. It doesn't matter. You're still Mekayim Mitzvah Karban Pesach. Says the Gemara, Filu Tamer Rabbanan, or it could even be the Rabbanan, Ein Machshebes Oichlin B'Zerika. By the time you get to Zerika, regarding those who eat the offering, it's not significant what their intent was concerning throwing the blood. It's tied at the time of Shechita. The whole thing is triggered at the time of the slaughter. At the time of the slaughter, if it was slaughtered correctly, with the potential to be able to eat, it's still good. That's what it is. Says the Gemara Vaita, Ma Tana Lo, the Tana Rabbana. Who's the Tana of this following brisa? Hare, Somebody was sick at the time of the slaughter, so he would have been unable to eat from the Karban Pesach. V'chalim, and he gets better. B'shas zerika, he heals by the time of zerika, so now he's capable of eating. Or flip the case around. Chalim b'shas shchita. He was okay at the time of the slaughter, b'chayla b'shas zerika, but got sick at the time of the throwing of the blood. Ein sheichten v'zaykin olav. They are not allowed to slaughter for him or throw the blood for him. Until he's healthy from the time of the shechita all the way through the avodah of throwing the blood. Keman, who's this like? It seems to be name Rabbanon he below Rab Nosson. That's the Rabbanon and not Rab Nosson, because they hold that the shechita only works if you have the capacity to eat. You only have the capacity to eat if you can throw the blood, right? Because the blood frees you up to eat the carbon. So in that case, you got to be good all the way through. Says the Gemara, El Filu Tamer Rav Nosson, Gabro de Chazi La'achila B'inon. Because Rav Nosson holds it's not tied to the animal. It's not tied to the avodah. It's tied to the person, to the Gabro. If the person at the time of shechita is good, he's capable of eating the meat. Even if something happens along the way that makes it impossible to eat the meat, I don't care. It's totally in the gavra, it's not totally in the chepsa. Good. Says the Gemara Vaita, who's the Tana of this following brisa? Shachtu b'tahara, if you slaughtered the Pesach in Tahara, when it was in a good state. And after the slaughter, the owners, the people registered on the animal become Tameh, Yizrak Hatam B'Tahara. The dam is thrown in a state of Tahara, but you should not eat in a state of Tumah. Keman, who's this like? Right? Says the Gemara. Goes like this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, the machlokes sheniyu v'Rabbi Nosson. The machlokes is totally on what we had before, and it's Rab Nosson, which seems very clear, because Rab Nosson says eating is not essential. So just because, right, shachtu tahara at the time of the slaughtering, the bailam were tar. They were tar. They were perfectly capable at the time. They were perfectly the gabra, the chazi la'achila. They were perfectly capable at that moment in time. They had the potential to eat it. The fact that they can't eat it afterwards is not my problem. No, it can even be the Rabbanon. This Baraisa, this third Baraisa, B'tzibor, was talking about in the Tzibor. It was a communal. In other words, where the majority of the community was Tameh, that became Tameh after the slaughter. And what do we say? Tumah hutra B'tzibor. Ta'afilu b'tumah nami ovid, 78b5, and the blood could be thrown in the community even in a state of tameh. Why? Because tumah is chutra b'tzibur. If everybody's tameh, what happens? There is no tameh. Says the Gemara, b'tzibur. But if you're telling me that we're talking about community-wide tameh, amai ein abasa nechal b'tumah. Well, then the meat should be able to be eaten, not just throw the blood. Remember what that Baraisa said, you shall not eat the meat b'tumah. If you're telling me that this Baraisa is talking about community-wide tameh, tumah is hutra b'tzibor, tumah is hutra b'tzibor, tumah becomes permitted in a tzibor, in a community, so I'm allowed to throw the blood, so I should be able to eat the carbon Pesach. And for the Gemara, you're right. The MS, you are allowed to eat the carbon Pesach because of Tumah Rotra B'tzibor. But Gezerah, the Rabbanan came because they were afraid what's going to happen next year. Remember in our case, Rabbi Isai, what happened? They became Tameh after the Shechita. The Shechita, at the time of the Shechita, everybody was Tahar. Only they became Tameh only after the Shechita. We're afraid next year the owners are going to become Tameh after the throwing of the blood. Not like this year, before the throwing of the blood. The Amru, and they're going to say, last year, didn't we become Tameh after the Avodah began, after the Shechita, and we were allowed to eat the offering? So this year, we should also be able to eat it when we're Tameh, but they didn't realize that last year, when the blood was thrown, the owners were already Tameh. And we say that the permitter, which means the trigger that allows us to eat, which is the throwing of the blood on the Mizbeach, that if everybody's Tameh, nobody is Tameh, that's before you throw the blood. Hashta Bailam Tairibu. Here, in our case, the owners were tar. They threw the blood. And only afterwards they became Tameh. Over there, you come afterwards and become Tameh. You can't eat. So, Mamela, since we were worried, we made a rule. The Rabbanan said that even where Tumah B'Hotam B'Tzibur works, and you became Tumah before you threw the blood, and truth of the matter is, by throwing the blood, you should be allowed to eat. We're going to worry about what kind of precedent it's going to set, and it's going to be learned up wrong. So we say don't eat. Because at the end of the day, eating is not ma'akif in the truth, only the potential to eat at the time of the Shechita. Now we're on stop. I am Tess. So now we go. Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Rav, who even said that bidi ebed, if you throw the blood, even though you cannot eat, it works, and you don't have to bring a Pesach Sheni. You can even go according to Rabbi Yeshua. How's that possible? Rabbi Yeshua is the one that says, if ain't basar, ain't dam, if there's no meat, there's no blood. The Tanya, because we learn like this. Rabbi Yeshua says, Kol zavachim shebeTorah, all animal offerings, all other zavachim of the Torah, the rule is bein shenit mabasa, the chelav kayim, whether the meat, its meat itself becomes stomach, but it's holy fats that are brought up on the base of Mikdash, on the altar, are kayim, bein shenit mechelav mabasa kayim, or flip the chelav, the holy fats that go up on the mizbeach, or the basa that it's eaten by us is good. Zayrik es Adam, Yizayrik the Dam. Because he says by all other kabbanis, as long as I have some food, whether food for me or food for the Rebbeinu Shalom, Shulchan Atzmai, my table, or Shulchan Gevaya, as long as I have a Shulchan, I have food for the table, it's good to go. Because the mitzvah of eating is not in me, the mitzvah is in the carbon. It needs to be eaten up. But here, right? Zarek is Adam. But Nazir, the case of a Nazir, or Ba'isa Pesach, or the making of a Pesach, the Nazir is somebody who vows not to cut his hair and drink wine for 30 days. Afterwards, he has to bring a set of kabbanis, including setting a fire and cutting his hair and burning his hair in that fire. Right? The rule is as follows. If the fats, the chaylev, become tameh, so they can't be brought on the altar. But the basar is kind of meat is okay, right? Zayrik es hadam, you throw the dam. Nitma basar v'chelev kayim, but it flipped around. If the basar is tameh, but the chelev is kayim, ain't zayrik es hadam, you do not throw the blood. The im zayrik hurts. But if lamaisi you do throw the blood, bidi eved, it expects acceptance. Nit mubaylim b'meis, but if the owners become tameh of the Pesach or the Nazir, become contaminated by a corpse, so that means they become contaminated by a corpse, so they themselves are what? An abatuma, right? The corpse is an aviyah b'isatuma. If you remember, back in Chanina, Kisagan, Kahanim, we learned this, that the highest level is a corpse. That's an aviyah b'isatuma. If anybody touches that, they become a abatuma. And anything they touch becomes a rishon l'tumah. Nitnu abaylim b'meis lo yizrak. L'vim zarak lo yichurtza. But if you throw it, it will not attain acceptance. Because here, there's no potential to eat. Zero, nada. Because if you remember, once you get to Tomei over there, everything remains Tomei. So now, let's go further. The Mishnah said, however, B'mugdoshin ain't okay. By all other offerings, it's not that. If the meat becomes tamei and the chaylev exists, you go ahead and you throw the blood. You do, and we understand why. Because it's not a din that I have to eat. It's a din that the carbon itself has to be eaten up. So it's not a problem. Says the Gemara, Masnitz and Mani. Who is this portion of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yeshua. It's Rabbi Yeshua. The Tanya, because we learned that Rabbi Yeshua, who says, Kol Zavachim Shebet Torah. All Zavachim that the Torah this talks about, slaughtered. And then the meat or the chaylev were destroyed, all that, or to become tamei. Gets destroyed or becomes tamei. Shenishtaya mehem kezayis bosa. Or kezayis chaylev. But what's left over at the very least is an olive's volume of the meat or an olive's volume of the chaylev. It's enough. Zayrik, it's adam. Good enough. You can throw the down. B'chatzi zayis bosa. But if you only have a half a zayis of the bosa, b'chatzi zayis chaylev, and only a half a zayis of the holy meats, ein zayrik es adam. You don't throw the dam because they do not mitzarif. They don't combine to make a shir achilo. They are achila, but the answer is simple. The chaylev goes up is shulchan gevoya. It's a different kind of eating. That's for the Abish's table. The basar is our table. The nafkamina would be a beautiful Rab Chaim. It says sliyesh al matzos umeroirim yoichlu. So Rab Chaim Soloveitchik, the uncle of Rab Yoshe, says like this. That means if you eat a kezayis of meat of the Pesach, and you eat a half a kezayis of matzah and a half a kezayis of maror, you mekayim the mitzvah of eating Pesach, because it says matzahs al memorim yochlu. So those two are together need to make up a kezayis to eat with the Pesach. So if you eat the carbon Pesach with a half a kezayis of matzah and a half a kezayis of maror, you mekayim the mitzvah of chilas Pesach. You're just not mekayim the mitzvah of be'erev toichlu matzahs, of eating matzahs at night, which is the reason why we eat two matzahs. When we make hamoitzi lechem in Oretz, we make it with two matzahs, right? And in fact, the one leading the seder has to eat a whole matzah, which is two kazesim, one for the carbon Pesach and one for the mitzvah of be'erev toichlu matzahs, because it's two separate things. So here we're saying, however, it's actually two separate things because it's two separate halachas. That shulchan gevoya to shulchan atzmai, so they don't combine. Uba oila, but regarding an oila, which an oila gets we don't eat anything. It gets completely burned on the mizbeach.
It's all gevoya.
Right, afil, very good. Ukim zayis, ubechatzi zayis chaylev. Even if I only have a half a zayis of basa and half a zayis of chaylev, zayrik is above. Dumb. Why? Because the entire thing is burned. Everything is for shulchan gevoya. Everything is for the bunch. So in that case, the fact that one is chaylev and one is basa doesn't matter. They're all going on the same table. Mincha, in the case of a mincha. Now, normally, what is a mincha, everybody? The flour offering. It's not. But right here, at this moment in time, we think it's the flour offering. The mincha, the flour offering, apopi shekula kayemes, even if it all exists, lies yizra, you don't throw it if it's tamei. Afraid to go about mincha maya viditim. What are you getting over here? There is no blood. There is no blood. It's flour. It's not blood. So Elamai says the Gemara, Amar Papa, minchas nesochin. Then, what are we talking about? We're talking about the minchas itself, the libation mincha. In other words, the wine that we bring along, right? Nichse yayin, right? The wine that we bring along with other kabbanis. Whenever you bring a zebach, you bring along with it some wine to throw on the mizbeach. All right? So we're coming to teach us that if all the meat and the chaylev are tamei, and only the wine still exists, in English, the libation still exists, you're not allowed to throw it. Why would you think you are allowed to throw it? I might have thought to say Since the only reason why you're bringing the libation, the only reason why you're bringing this wine is only because you're bringing this animal offering, this carbon, it's tied to the goof, to the animal offering itself, and therefore, as long as the animal exists, you can throw it, even if the animal itself is tamei, kamash malan, that no, the blood is not allowed to be thrown unless some of the actual meat or chalev of the animal exists. And the reason for this is because the minchas nisachim, the libations, are not ma'akif. If you don't have them, the carbon is still accepted. So they are not really part of the carbon. They are an accessory. They're an accessory to the carbon. It's for an example, at a wedding, you have a band that plays music. But if you didn't have a band, it's still a wedding. The music is only an accessory to enhance the thing. It's not the actual thing itself. Now, back on 77A, what time is it? We only have a few minutes here. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try to get to this mission over here. And I'm sorry it took so much time, but this was really difficult and interesting stuff. We will catch up as the week goes on. Don't worry about it. Chalev, because I got to finish in about 3 minutes. Chalev minolan. Where do we know that chalev exists? We're allowed to throw the blood. Remember, Rabbi Yeshua has been saying over here that as long as, even if the holy fats exist and they're being brought up on the Shulchan Gevoya, on heaven's table, it's good enough to go. How does he know this? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Umataba Mishum Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanina, and some say it was said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanina. The Amar Kron, because the pasuk says, the hiktir achelev l'reach nichayach l'Hashem. The kohen shall throw the blood upon the altar, and he shall burn the chelev for a good smell, a reach nichayach to Hashem, for a satisfying smell to Hashem. So in other words, with all your senses, you're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chelev apopish ein basar. From this pasuk, it means this chelev, you can throw the blood even if there is no meat. We're on 79A2. Askerchon chelev. Good, now you found chelev. Yoseres hakaved v'shnei hakalois minolan. How do I know that the other things that are brought up on the altar, i.e. the diaphragm and the 2 kidneys, are also justified? If you have those, you can justify the throwing of the blood. Hey, Chamin is Rican. So the Gemara says, who said? Who said? Maybe only where I have the meat that justifies the throwing. Who says that the other matonos, the other presents that we bring up onto the Mizbeach, who said just because the diaphragm and the kidneys exist that you're allowed to throw the blood? Says the Gemara Diktani, because we learned by a mincha, by the libations, even though all of it exists, you cannot throw the blood. But that would mean the diaphragm and the kidneys, if they exist, are okay to throw the blood. Minolan, how do I know this? Says Rabbi Yochanan in the day of it. Rabbi Yochanan explained it himself. He said, Amakra, the pasuk that we just said before, right, which was the hikter achel the rei nechayich l'Hashem, you shall burn the chalev, the fats, for a good smell for Hashem. Amakra l'reich nechayich, a satisfying aroma. Kol sha'ata malach l'reich nechayich, anything that you bring up on the mizbeach for a good smell justifies throwing the blood. You needed to mention the word chalev, and you mentioned the word reich nichayach. Because if the Torah had only said the word chalev, hava minach chalev in yitzeres hakaved ushnei k'lo yitzlahi, I would have thought chalev is dafka, only the fats justify throwing the blood, but not the diaphragm and the kidneys. Kasam rachmana l'reach nichayach. Anything that gives a satisfying aroma, which includes the kidneys and the diaphragm. Because of Rachmana l'reich nichayach, satisfying aroma. Hava min, I might have thought, kol oil l'reich nichayach, that anything that goes up onto the altar for a satisfying aroma is significant. Va'afilu mincha, that would mean even the mincha. When you throw the wine onto the mizbeach, it gives a good smell, right? And then that would be allowed to be done too. Because of Rachmana chalev, the Torah says chalev, that dafka only part of the animal itself. You can throw the blood, but things that are ancillary, no, you cannot. Very good. We're up to the Mishnah here. Tomorrow I will